Welcome everyone to Coaching in Session. My name is Michael Rearden, and I'll be your mindset coach today. And today we're going to be talking about spirituality, finding your purpose, and much more. And today I'm going to be having on a guest, Jeremiah Scott, who's going to be helping us with that journey and speaking about his journey and his mindset and his perspective on everything. Because in life, we have the beauty of the unknown. We don't necessarily know what tomorrow is going to bring, but yet many people hope and they anticipate tomorrow. Would it be wrong to say today might be my last day? How can I make it the best? Or would it be better to understand that we have this whole entire life, this whole entire book that needs our handwriting or it needs our touch to really be lived? Oftentimes, I think what we do is we just kind of throw everything and we try to do as much as we can. We try to have as many experiences as we can. And we say that certain things are going to fulfill us or certain things are going to bring us balance or happiness. But in reality, is that really truly balance? Is that truly life? And the conversation that Jeremiah and I have is going to be helping us understand that maybe life is not so much about what we were told or what we were led to believe. Because if we can begin to open up who we are and dissect it in the sense of, I like this, I don't like this, this is where I was, this is where I am, where will I be? So it's kind of like understanding your journey, understanding how to read a map, but this map is not a map that's going to send you to a destination on the world or on the planet, but more so a destination in your life and in your future. So if you're interested in learning where you want to be in your life or where you should be, you're not going to want to miss this episode with Jeremiah Scott and myself. Welcome, Jeremiah Scott, to Coaching in Session. How are you doing today?
I'm very good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for coming on. So today I have you as a spiritual speaker and author. And for anyone who might be wondering what a spiritual speaker and author does, it's going to be in line with what a spiritual guide or spiritual counselor would be in the working habits of. So when it comes to being spiritual and to identifying yourself as a spiritual guide or a counselor, or just even being in the world of helping people find a spiritual alignment or balance, I use the term loosely. It's a lot more than just looking up in the sky and saying, okay, today's going to be a good day. And we get our zodiac signs, we read our horoscopes. It's more than that. And today I have you on to talk about spiritual wisdom and everything about spirituality in the sense of who we are and who we are becoming. In your own words, can you explain who you are and how you help people?
Yeah, certainly. So for me, my spiritual journey is one of trying to understand, like you said, where we come from as a precursor to where we're heading. So I think if we look sometimes at the systems that we've shaped our societies, our cultures, we can get a bit of an indication of what it perhaps is to be human. So for me, I like to explore all of the different mainstream religions. I've traveled the world to work with different spiritual beings or leaders or influencers, whatever we want to refer to them as. I spent a little bit of time over in the Amazon. I started going there in 2015. I was very fortunate to cross paths with a third generation shaman, and I was able to learn a little bit about plant medicine and how the shamans finds that balance within the natural environment as opposed to trying to perhaps conquer it or own it. So it's like a bit of a different way of living. I've spent a lot of time studying Western spiritual ideas. I've got a little bit of knowledge with some of the Eastern philosophies as well. For me, it's still an evolving journey. But why do I do that? I kind of feel growing up that it became apparent to me there was a lot of sadness in the world, a lot of frustration. Sometimes it seems that our society is not really fit for purpose. A lot of people who are in the younger generations are struggling to achieve the same things as what come before them. And so I looked and I began to understand. I was thinking, right, well, we've got these spiritual systems that can help us to perhaps understand ourselves. But I started looking at how the world was when those systems come into fruition. And then I had a bit of an epiphany a few years back. And I sort of thought to myself, well, the ancient Egyptians and the Victorians, they would have faced the same challenges. The world was very similar. You know, they didn't have technology. They didn't have automobiles, didn't have airplanes. And they really didn't even have electricity. So you'd look at the way these cultures lived, and their major obstacles would have been healthcare for children, finding food, finding clean water. And I found it fascinating to think, okay, an Egyptian and a Victorian could talk about how they were trying to overcome the same problems, even though there was 4,500 years between them. But then all of a sudden, we've had this industrial revolution. We've accelerated our culture, our societies forwards at such a rate. We've really lost touch with everything that come before. And so although we might try to find some grounding in these old systems of thinking, and they do help a lot of people, I'm not discrediting any of that. I just felt like perhaps we need to look deeper and find something new, find something more, because we can't really communicate. If with a Victorian or an Egyptian, we would have different problems to them. We've taken care of healthcare and food and water and warmth and all of those base level of secure needs. And so for me, I feel that I would like to explore what it is to be human in this modern age. I think that if we would look at the cultures that we've created for ourselves, I would say that we're a very scientific and rational, logical based culture, particularly in the West. And I think that science wants to measure everything. It wants to observe it. It wants to conduct experiments. It wants to find repeatable results. And science has helped us all massively in the last sort of 100 years or so. But science, if you can't see it and you can't feel it and you can't observe it, it doesn't know how to work with it. And when you begin to understand that the vast majority of this universe is non-material, dark matter, dark energy, things that we don't know, we can't grab onto. I think, okay, well, even the scientific thinking is limited because it's only working with what can be seen and observed. So for me, it's trying to push on deeper and find out, what can we do to find that peace, that happiness, that acceptance that a lot of us are searching for.
I talk about this quite often on the podcast, how we are moving into tougher times because we are giving ourselves an easier life. If we look back at who we once were, we were hunters and gatherers, and we were people who banded together in tribes and communities, and now we're very singular. I can be by myself and I can be fine, where I can go to the grocery store and get all the goods I need, all the provisions I need, and I can have all my basic needs met, especially here in the West, very easily. My food, my water, my shelter, my safety, security are all taken care of. We have a privilege that many people, especially maybe a million years ago, didn't have. And we look at healthcare, that's another thing, right? The science and how we have electricity and cars and things like that. Our life has become very simple. But when we give ourselves that simple life, what do we give ourselves in return? I often say that since we're giving ourselves easy times, we're giving ourselves a tougher future because we are giving ourselves a mindset that is not able to handle grief, is not able to handle sadness and anxiety. Because we have everything taken care of, we have a different form of stress today than I'm sure the Mayans did or the ancient Egyptians did. But today we're living in easy times. What comes with easy times today that we would have maybe learned if we kept true to some of our ancient and spiritual habits?
Well, I think for me, again, these obstacles that we're having, so you talk about grief, you talk about anxiety, depression, lots of mental health issues that we face as a society today. And I think that they're a symptom of the society, but not in a way that perhaps we understand. So you talked about the Mayans. Now, the Aztecs, the Mayans, they looked at life differently to us in the sense we have an idea in the West, in the modern world, that to become old, to live a long and healthy life is honorable. This is the thing that we should aspire for. But the Aztecs really looked at life from the perspective, it's not how you lived, it's how you died. Now, this didn't mean that they were suicidal, but they understood that death was something that was going to happen for all of us. And there were different types of deaths that would grant them certain privileges in the afterlife. Now, whether or not that's true or not, it's an interesting way to understand that their whole underpinning of society, the way that they saw themselves and what would happen when they passed on, was totally different to how we look at the world today. I also think that this technical, engineering, scientific approach to life makes us feel that we need to analyze and interpret and deconstruct everything and discard what we don't want, cut the bits out that are damaging us, that are wrong, that are making us unhealthy. But if we look at anxiety and we look at depression and we look at fear, these things, if misunderstood, if left to get out of control, they can ruin your life. But we have to understand that anxiety, for example, people want to discard it. They want to push it away. They don't want to feel it. But anxiety is telling you that you're not on a path that's very good. And maybe you want to do something about that. So why would we want to cut out that warning system? So I spent a lot of time trying to understand anxiety, and I found that there's different types of it. I refer to them as legitimate anxiety and illegitimate anxiety. So if you haven't paid your bill and you haven't worked as hard as you could, and you start to face the prospect of losing your car, your house, your ability to provide for yourself, and you have an anxious feeling that that is on the horizon, should you ignore that or should you act on that? You should act on that anxiety. It's trying to stop something negative from happening to you. That is a legitimate concern that needs to be addressed. An illegitimate anxiety, so say you think, I need to turn the light off 5 times before I leave the house or my family will die. That's illegitimate. We need to discard that. But we can't just go, right, I don't like anxiety, I need to push it all away. So I feel that understanding things and how they can serve us, it's like looking at the polarity of it. We look at the bad and the discomfort and the things that aren't serving us. And that is what our society has taught us to do. You also talk about shamanic cultures, tribal cultures, people that would have to hunt and gather, and that was their dominant purpose within the world. And I think that we can pin that to, I think it's Maslow's theory of motivation. He created this sort of pyramid structure. And so we had to take care of these base levels of the pyramid. And each time we took care of something, we migrated up the pyramid and we had different things available to us. So those base levels would be warmth, food, security, financial stability. Now, these things come a lot easier to us today than they would have at other times within humanity's existence. But really, I feel that there's a confusion. We are starting on the pyramid perhaps a little bit higher. If we're born in the West, in the modern world, we have certain privileges that are just granted to us just from being born in that correct location. And so instead of saying, oh, okay, life was simpler, maybe we should reconnect with the way that our ancestors used to live. But for me, I think, no, we need to understand where we are on this pyramid of motivation, because the top of that is supposedly self-actualization, you having the ideal life for you as an individual. And so if you want to go back down the pyramids, well, then you're going to have a harder job getting back up to that potential of self-actualization. Now, self-actualization isn't something that everybody can achieve. We might dedicate our whole life to it and never get anywhere. But really, for me, it's trying to understand what we are and the differences between the way other cultures throughout history looked at life, the way they looked at the world that they existed in, and how we can use some of that to our benefit today. Really, there isn't, unless we have some sort of massive catastrophe, we're unlikely to go back to life as it was. So looking backwards, we can't dream that we would like to have that life. Maybe we should be looking and going, okay, what was good about that? And what could we build on? Because humanity and society and our culture, it is a progressive evolution. We're moving forwards, aren't we? Mm. And so when we have that trajectory, it's very tough to go backwards. So I think for me, clarity of both sides of the arguments is important. I look at everything that my body, my mind does, and a lot of it I might not like on face value, but I think it's very important in my journey to explore, like, why? What's the other side? Let's try to see all aspects of this debate before I say, no, I don't want to feel depression. I don't want to feel anxiety. Let's remove it. I think it's trying to guide me to what it is that I really want, even though it's uncomfortable in that moment.
I think oftentimes many people give themselves an anxiety that shouldn't be there. For example, I need to have an anxiety that I have the right car. Otherwise, someone's not going to like me, or the right clothes, or someone's not going to like me, where we worry about some of the superficial things that might not be beneficial for our growth and I guess to reach our self-actualization. And if we look at the top of that pyramid and we look at where we are going to be, finding our purpose and finding our fulfillment, I think sometimes many people, we give ourselves an idea of what might make us fulfilled rather than what does make us fulfilled. And I'm going to explain that just a little bit. We think oftentimes, especially here in the West, I'll be happy when I get a big house, I get a marriage, I get this car, these dream clothes, and we place happiness there. And we make sure our purpose or our work is going to be helping us get there. So we typically will have a career like a doctor, a lawyer, an entrepreneur, that is going to help us reach our goals. I've worked with some of the most wealthy people here in America. And what I can tell you is that when they get to that top and they're able to buy whatever they want and have the life that they want, fulfillment is one of those things that they're always looking for. typically where they have to go from there is to be grateful for what they have versus trying to fill their life with even more stuff, more materials, more things that don't fill them up. So when we get to that point when a person is trying to find out what they're supposed to be doing in their life, they're trying to find their purpose, what is that process to you?
Okay, so what you're referring to there, in my opinion, is again a symptom of how we've organized our societies in the West. So we have this idea drummed into us subconsciously from a very young age that everything must expand. So you go to school and you must get good grades, and then you might go to college, and then you come out and you've got to get a great job, and the car that you speak about, you've got to get a nice car, and then you've got to trade it in a few years later for something better, maybe more powerful, maybe more luxurious. Everything's like a balloon, it's continuously expanding. And we're sold this promise that as the result of an expansion, it's possible you might find some form of unknown happiness. So maybe when you get this brand new car, you're going to feel amazing. Maybe when you meet the partner of your dreams, life's going to be perfect. We're all looking, we're all searching and pushing outwards. And this journey to have more and more and more, this is the way the Western mind really looks at the world. And we teach our children this by accident, I think, right from when they're very, very young. If I look at the Buddhists, if I look at Eastern views on society, they take a bit of a reductionist view, discard unnecessary material, get rid of all of these pleasures and find yourself. So we have these conflicting ways of looking at life. In the West, we say get more, you might find happiness. In the East, they say get rid of everything and you'll find yourself and happiness as a result. But I think that we look at the tides of the seas. I think I spend a lot of time finding nature provides me with the answers that I'm maybe looking for. And I love going to the beach. I love the sea. But the tide comes in and out twice a day, doesn't it? It's not in a fixed state. Sometimes it's expanding, sometimes it's reducing. And so I think that taking one approach, if the tide went out and never come back, if it just reduced itself forever, this would be no good for us. And vice versa. If the tide just kept on coming in and in and in, that's no good for us as well. You know, we're going to wash away all of our land, all of our houses. And so we need to understand that it's that balance, that in and out. And we understand in scientific terms that this whole universe is made up of vibration. But what is a vibration? Well, it's the up and the down, isn't it? A vibrational wave has a peak and a trough, and we can't have half of a vibration. Everything is that polarity, the yin, the yang, the duality, the up and the down, the light and the dark. We can't have one without the other. We need context as well. And so people might go, oh, I shouldn't have this car. I should be happy with what I've got. But I like to sort of remind people that if we were born into this beautiful paradise, how would you know that it's a paradise? You need some sort of negativity. It doesn't mean that you're going to have to go out and find that. I find it fascinating because I work with a lot of people in a one-on-one basis, and I find that the mind is always trying to find the point in which things weren't very good as the barometer to move away. So we look, some people who might have had a tough life will hear from someone who is depressed and they'll say, oh, I had this almost minor occurrence happen as a child and it caused lifelong depression. And someone who's overcome some traumas that could be argued are much more serious might look at this and be, are you serious? Like, how have you allowed that to make you depressed? That was just a Monday morning for me. It's not a competition, but what we need to understand is that the mind is always trying to root itself. What is that point that I didn't like? Because that is my direction of which I need to move away from. So when we understand, I mean, the Buddhists would say it's burning off karma. Maybe you need that material object to realize that your happiness wasn't there, so then you can release that karma. I'm a youngish man in the Western world. When I was coming up to 30 years old, I'd set myself this target that I wanted to have a sports car because, you know, I just thought that this was a marker of success. And I achieved that. I bought that for my 30th birthday and I enjoyed it. It was great. But I understood what it was that I was doing. And then once I had that, it's not like I need more and more sports cars. I had the experience of it. And then it's like you can sort of put it to bed. So I think sometimes if we deny ourselves what we want, that can cause as much problem as getting it over and over and over again. So really it is trying to understand, again, the nature of the societies that we've created and what we can do about it to benefit the self. And so I feel for me, remembering I'll have phases of my life that are expanding and phases that of reduction. And this is the nature. This is life. I shouldn't become depressed if things aren't pushing on as fast as they want or as I want. And so I think to myself, I'll enjoy those times of rapid development, of growth, and I'll be reflective in the times of this apparent reduction. It's just like going to the beach. The tide goes in and out. You have to enjoy both phases of the same cycle.
And I like to look at nature in the sense of fall and summer as a guidepost for me to see life. Because if you live in New England here in America, we have a wonderful fall where all the leaves decide to change colors. And for many people, that tree signifies their life. They spend all their life for a couple of months in nature. It's going to be only a couple of months amassing these beautiful, lush green leaves. And the common person is going to be very strict or very rigid, and they're not going to want to get rid of these leaves because that's loss. We don't know how to grieve. We don't know how to let go here in the West. So we hold on to all the world problems, all the material things that we have. That's why people have things that they might have from 5 years ago in a drawer or in the garage or in the shed, because we don't learn how to shed that. We don't learn how to let go. But fall does something amazing. The leaves start to change colors and we start to see, oh, wow, look how beautiful this is to let go. The tree is not afraid. The tree is not afraid to let go. And the tree is not afraid to be different because those green leaves are now yellow and orange and red. That tree is doing what it needs to do to create that balance, that good and that bad. And we need that good and we need that bad in our life, because if you have grown up with a silver spoon in your mouth and you were taken care of and you didn't have a single worry in the world, it's going to be difficult for you to see that bad. But when something bad happens to you, no matter how minute, it's going to be something that you have to deal with, maybe even a trauma. A trauma for maybe someone who's rich and wealthy might be that their mom didn't want to give them a BMW, or their dad didn't want to give them a BMW for their 15th or 16th birthday. A trauma for someone who's maybe poor and they don't have much is that on their 15th or 16th birthday, they couldn't go to the beach with their friends. Something simple as that. Like they just wanted something so simplistic to be with their friends on their birthday versus a car that's worth $50,000 to $60,000. So trauma is different. That good and that bad that we have in our life is different. And it's going to be situational depending on how you're growing up. But I wanted to talk to you about the wisdom of the yin and the yang and the idea of letting go. What do we gain when we let go of the things that don't matter and we start to really focus in on the things that do matter? You kind of said it a little bit with how in the West we think of amassing, and the Buddhist cultures, they think about getting rid of and trying to be as minimal as possible.
Well, Buddha himself, he called it the middle way, didn't he? And so he was born a prince and then he left that life. And what he did immediately after that was choose a life of poverty. And he decided, after he'd spent the time with people who lived in that way, he found that neither was good for the human mind, the human soul. That was why he developed his own middle way. Now, this sort of circles back to what I was saying at the start. For me, I think that we need a new middle way. Okay, so we've lost a lot of skills that we had in like prior times. There's very few of us in the Western world who know how to reliably grow our own food, find clean water. We have that taken care of for us. And so this could put us at a disadvantage, but it could also put us at a strong advantage because we have that free time to begin to look at what it is that we want to be. And so sometimes people think, oh, I wish I could free myself from financial constraints. Like I don't want to have to pay these bills every month. I don't want this. But we do want the benefits that come with that. People pay taxes and they might not be happy about it. They want the fire and the police and the ambulance to come if there's an emergency. You know, this is the result of taxation in the West. I think that we need to understand even the welfare state. People have a massive issue with paying taxes and people seemingly sitting around and enjoying the fruits of their labor. But I like to think it's maybe a little bit controversial, but the human will always take what they want. They will always get what they want in some way or another. It might not be ideal for them. And so the welfare system allows a developed society to reduce the rates of crime. Now, you could pay no taxes and you could keep every penny that you wanted. And then those people that didn't want to work, they're going to become more and more frustrated if they've got absolutely nothing. They see you're getting bigger and bigger houses. Well, how long is it going to be before you have a mob at your door trying to take what you've worked for and earned? And in a way, we're doing this as a society anyway, because we look at the billionaires and we go, why are we not taxing them more? Why are we not doing this? They've got too much. When is enough enough? And so the human mind has an issue, I think, fundamentally with an individual having too much. And so that balance that you speak about, I think that is something that maybe we need to look at as a society, as a culture. I think you spoke about grief a few times, and you've said how people have a difficulty expressing grief, accepting it. And again, you're right when you say it's holding on. People want to hold on to material and they hold on to their energy. Now, if I look at what grief to me represents, it represents an inability to express the love for that thing, that situation, that person. So if it's something's taken from you unexpectedly or quite quick, and you had developed this routine or this lifestyle, if you had a partner that you'd lived with for 20, 30, 40 years and they were suddenly taken from you, all that love that you used to express on a daily basis, you've now got no outlet for it. And I think that it's not necessarily that people are unsure of how to let things go, but I feel that sometimes people struggle with that concept of change. And so what we need to understand is that if you have lost something or someone that's so deeply important to you and you now have no way to effectively love them in the way that you did, that energy isn't just going to be switched off. So what we need to do is start to think, how do I let this out just so that I can release some of that pressure from myself, so that heartbreak maybe begin to alleviate? It's tough. I mean, I think that just trying to understand things, I feel that we're emotional beings. If you look at the way that a child develops, a child who's having a tantrum for something that they don't like, that is their emotional response. And when we look at the way the brain evolves and develops, none of us really develop our rational centers until we're in our teenage years and our early 20s. And some people do a better job than other people. You know, it's like this way that the human brain, the human mind evolves and develops. It's not standardized. It's different for each person. But what we do know is that certain systems within the brain take a lot longer to switch on. And so I've found, particularly with people who maybe don't want to be here in this life. So I've done quite a bit of work with people who are suicidal, young males as well. We know that that's a bit of an epidemic in the Western world at the moment. I've lost some friends from this sort of terrible way of having to deal with their problems. It's an awful thing for us to have to face. But I look at it and there's so many factors at play. But one of them I've found is that people who experienced traumas as a child and didn't have anybody to turn to. So maybe they come from complex family units. Maybe their mothers and their fathers or their caregivers didn't understand them as fully as they wanted to be understood. And so they had to deal with their traumas alone. And so this is very significant for me, because I thought, okay, a child who has to deal with a trauma by themselves only has an emotional coping mechanism available to them. They haven't developed logic or reason yet. And so they deal with their problems in an emotional way. And an emotional response to trauma or a tough situation in life is to go, I don't want to be here anymore. It's the ultimate protest. Taking your own life is the biggest protest that you can have. This world is so corrupt, so rotten, so wrong that I need to remove myself from it. You're protesting against the conditions that you're living in. And I think, well, where does this come from? And a lot of it is an emotional response, isn't it? Because if we begin to look at our problems from a rational or a logical response, we might be able to find different answers as opposed to sitting there and going, I hate the way this feels. If we begin to look at the way the mind works, I think that this, again, we're layering up now. We're developing a bit of it's not a simple strategy for dealing with the world that we live in. So I think that we need to understand where we come from. I think we need to understand the way that prior cultures looked at life. I think we need to understand what it is that they've left for us. Because if you look at human society and culture, what it really is to me is a collection of ideas that pass through the ages. So we're sitting here now, we didn't create this system that we're engaging with. We're speaking from opposite sides of the world. We had no part in inventing these devices that we're connecting with. But people who had that idea, they've left that, and all of humanity are benefiting from it. we warm ourselves with fire. We didn't discover the way to create fire. We drive cars with wheels. We didn't discover the wheel. So as a human culture, we're always benefiting from ideas that have been left from someone else or a different time. And I think that understanding that you have the opportunity to do that yourself, you can live a life as an individual, you can have friends, family, you can have a successful career, you can love and you can leave wealth and you can do all of these things. But you can also live a life of enriching human society in some small way. You could write something, you could try to think up something or solve a problem or leave some art or whatever it is. And I think that we are taught in the West to look at ourselves as individuals. So we're given this name when we're born, and it tricks us into believing that we're this singular being. But we're multiple systems within this organism, but we're also different people with different lives. So if you had met me as a teenager, or if you meet me in my mid-20s or my mid-30s, you'll have a different idea of who I am. I'm not that same individual. Every cell in my body changes every 8 years or so. So it's kind of like accepting what we are and trying to enhance the possibility of what we can be, as opposed to trying to cling on to something. So when you talk about people holding on to grief and holding on to materialism, again, this is a symptom of this incorrect idea that you are just this one thing.
All that was amazing, number one. When we're looking at the family system now, and we look at kids today, I think sometimes parents, especially here in the West, they say, you have it so easy. You have it easier than I did. So we're basically telling them that they have an easy life. In reality, kids have stress too. Kids have to deal with different types of emotions too, and especially for the first time sometimes, because they're just growing up and they're learning things for the first time. I mean, when I was a teacher, I saw a first grader like pulling out the hair full of stress because of standardized testing, versus mom and dad might be worrying about how they're going to pay for the light bill or the water bill, right? So they're worried about something different. So they look at that kid's stress as, oh, I wish I had your stress. To them, it's insignificant. But we have to grow with it, right? So we grow and we learn and we evolve and we become stronger in the sense of mindset. And then when we are teenagers, we can make more logical and critical decisions, or be able to critically think better. But then we get hit with hormones too. So then, so now our mind is thinking in a different way because of the chemicals that are, that is in our brain and in our body. So sometimes rational thinking is out the window, because we might think, oh, we know everything, especially teenagers. They get to that point where they amass a bunch of knowledge and they say, you know what, I know everything. I'm equipped to handle the world. But in reality, they don't know much. It's very humbling when you're older and you look back at where you were and just how much you were in that sense of ignorance. For me, what I love, the most about education and teaching is not knowledge, but wisdom. Wisdom is one of those things that we don't have to experience, but we can be told and then have that story. This often happened with your elders. It doesn't have to be in the West. It doesn't have to be in the East. It doesn't have to be the ancient Egyptians or the Mayans. Our elders will tell us stories. Those stories would give us perspective, right? So we say, oh, they went through this. They had a walk to work, things like that. So they are going to be inquisitive typically and ask questions. I'm sure you probably heard about the story about the Native American grandfather who was telling the grandson a story about the two wolves. And then he says, we have two wolves inside of us. One wolf is an evil wolf. One wolf is a good wolf. And the grandson was inquisitive, of course. And he says, well, which one wins? And the grandfather said, whichever one you feed. So there's many stories like that. And if you think about Zen and Buddhism, there's so many stories of wisdom that come through with those stories and those lessons. I think we stepped away from storytelling in our Western society. So now many of the kids that are growing up, they're learning the world for what it is as a blanket statement rather than it is from the roots. It's similar to how if you look at a tree, you see the trunk, the branches, and you see the leaves, but you don't see the roots. And I think we have gone away from our roots as a society. And I think that is causing a lot of turmoil in a lot of people's minds.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's we're moving so fast that people aren't pausing to look at what maybe we're losing and gaining. And so when you talk about kids and families and the stresses that children have today, well, it is you're right. For me, I look back, and my father is only 17 years older than me. He was very young when he had me. I look at the way that he lived his life, and I look at the way my grandfather lived his life, and I look at the way my great-grandfather lived his life. And it was really interesting because those three generations were all able to give each other advice. So if my father had a problem, he could speak to his granddad or his father about it, and they would maybe be able to offer some practical advice. But those three generations have no answers to any of my problems. So my generation, we're talking people who are in their late 30s, early 40s. We are perhaps the first generation in a very long time. I'm not going to say ever, because how could any of us possibly know? But we are the first generation in a very long time that cannot be parented in the same way that our parents understood. And so there is this disconnect between the older generations and the newer ones. We see the council culture like intensifying this, because we have to be very careful of what we say. You know, you've got people now that were behaving in ways that they shouldn't have behaved by today's standards, but were socially acceptable in the 60s, 70s, 50s, whatever. And we have people who are now being punished for crimes that they've committed years ago. And we forget that those things were socially acceptable when they were doing it. You know, I don't know about in the US, but in the UK, there are slightly people a little bit older than me. There are teachers that are living with students. In the 1960s and 70s in the UK, it was common for a teacher to end up dating a student. Now, I don't agree with this, don't think it's right. And it's great that we have this privilege now where those things are stamped out, they're recognised and they're dealt with. And maybe this should have come in a lot sooner. I'm not one to say that. But what I'm saying is the result of all of this progress, all of this change, is that we don't really know how to parent in the way that we did in prior generations. And I think that is creating some new issues. I also think that it's worth remembering that education is this giant experiment. The school systems, as we understand it today, are less than 100 years old. Education used to be reserved for the wealthy. It was a privilege of the upper classes, and now it's something that we all have, but we don't know whether it's being done right or wrong, because we're in the middle of this big social experiment, and it's evolving. And that's why what I learned at school is different to what the children today learn. And that's why people sit there and go, oh, well, why didn't anybody teach me about taxes or savings or investments? Well, because nobody thought to, because we're in this big giant experiment. But because we grew up in it, we think it's all real and important and serious, and we don't really look at it for what it is. I agree with you about storytelling as well. I think that stories touch our souls. I think that fables and analogies and symbolism that you speak of, I think that is wonderful, and I think that it's really important. But if I look at that, where are the stories now? Well, they're in our movies, aren't they? So we've shifted over, and we've got these giant industries that are creating superhero movies. And what are they? They're imagination, they're stories, but they're detached. They don't really teach us perhaps the morals as quickly and as effectively as prior generations did. We still have these things, but they've sort of morphed and shifted into something new. We look at CGI now. That's a storyteller's dream, isn't it? You know, all of these graphics in the movies, they're amazing. But I think that we also have to understand that people don't want to feel silly. And so if you're faced with a child that is tearing its hair out, as you said, and this is something that's very alarming, and as an adult who maybe thinks that their life is very tough, you might look at that and think, I don't need this. And that's the honest truth. That they're not going to say. They're going to go, oh, imagine having my problems. I'd love to have your problems. So they're disregarding the issue because they're looking at it and they're like, this is complex. Where do I even begin to analyze and understand and help? And so I think sometimes if people are faced with a situation that might make them feel a little bit weak, silly, powerless, not very clever, they try to sort of laugh it off and push it away and discard it. I think we're probably all guilty of pushing issues away at some point or another within our life. Children who believe they know it all, this is a way for them to simplify a complex world, isn't it? So we go, oh, that child's got a big ego. But really what it is it shows that they're anxious. They're anxious about getting it wrong. They're anxious about worrying how much they need to learn because they don't know anything. And so they don't look at the world from a sort of curious vantage point. They look at it from a fearful vantage point, and they go, right, if I just convince myself I know the answers because I learned so much so quickly, then I can just push everything away and I don't have to worry about getting it wrong. And so I think maybe when it comes to parenting or educating the younger generations, maybe we need to look at life with that curious nature and teach them to look at life with curiosity as well. Like, what is it that's happening? Why do they feel the way that they do? What is it that they're hoping for? I think that we shouldn't make our children feel silly for wanting to understand more or explore things. I think that we need to be prepared to ask ourselves difficult questions when we see a child who is displaying some alarming behavior. Well, we're going to have that uncomfortable realization that maybe it was us that caused that, and nobody wants to accept that. So they'll try to make it a simple problem that can be pushed away. And so, yeah, it's learning again. This spiritual way of looking at life can help you to ask those deeper questions that might be uncomfortable. You know, that spirituality, like you said at the start, it's not all about zodiacs and is today going to be a good day. It's about asking ourselves those questions, putting ourselves into that mindset to push beyond maybe what's socially acceptable or understandable. And it's not always going to be fun, you know?
What is the best question or the best set of questions you have told yourself or asked yourself to help you gain a better understanding of who you are and who you're becoming?
For me, the best set of questions, I think that it would be like, why? Why do I do this? Mm-hmm. What is it that I'm looking for? Who am I as well? I meditated on that a number of years ago, and I kept on. Every time I got deeper and deeper and deeper, I realized that all of the things that I was taught or suggested that I might be, I'm not any of those things. So to understand who I am is something that drives me on. And to realize as well that to let go of competition. You said about the car earlier. So a small aspect of wanting a nice car is maybe we are in competition with society or an individual or a group of individuals. And so for me, I kind of realized years ago that when it comes to our competitive nature, that even if I won against someone, let's say I was playing a sports match and my team won, the other team are always going to find a way to justify that the win wasn't quite valid. Oh, if we had our strongest player was injured, or the ref was biased against you, he comes from your hometown, he was going to let your team win. And so even if you win a competition, it's very rare that the opponent accepts the victory and goes, okay, I'm happy with my loss. You're victorious, enjoy it. And so then I realized there's no point in me being competitive with other people, because even if I win, I don't win. And then I realized that even if I compete with myself, I still can't beat myself, because every time I have a victory, my mind's waiting with the next thing that I need to do. So I understand that competitive energy is useful for pushing me on, but I shouldn't be dictated by it. So really asking, why am I the way I am? Why is our world the way it is? Why have we organized things? So the why is always important. The how is important to me. What I am is important to me. And understanding the things that drive me. So just trying to get to the bottom of things. It wouldn't necessarily be a set of questions, but more like a set of words. So like why, how, what. So I'll always try to delve in and find out what's happening. For me, again, something that's I had some realizations earlier in the year, and I started looking at our world as a set of permissions. So I'm referring to this as systems of permission. And I started realizing that we're all trying to find permission to do one thing or another. And nothing in our life is based on necessarily free will in the way that we understand it. Decided to go, and I hadn't worked for anyone else for about 20 years. I've just sort of done my own thing. But I'm trying to develop a charitable business over in the UK, helping people who are struggling with their mental health. And I wanted some funding for that. And so I thought, I'll go and take a delivery job. And I was fascinated because it was tough work. We had to get up at 2 a.m. every day, and we'd work for sort of 6 hours each day. And it was 7 days a week, didn't get any time off. And it was all weather conditions. It was real challenging work. And I started getting to know some of the other people at the depot. And there was one woman she was having to look after her family. Her mother and her father were quite old, and she was needing the extra funding for that. But she had a husband and she had grown-up children, and no one was contributing. And so she was trying to care for them, and she was trying to care for the parents. And so in the end, I kind of clicked, and I was like, she's doing this job because she's pushing herself to the limit. She's suffering. And eventually she will have granted herself the permission to stand up and say, look, this is not right. I need some help. So my husband should help me. My children should help me. Maybe I need some additional outside social care for my mother and father. But at some point she will snap. Now, we always see the rags to riches stories for entrepreneurs. But what is this? This is, again, it's another system of permission. Someone gets so low, they're cold, they might get frostbite sleeping in a shop door one night, and they go, enough's enough. This is my breaking point. Everybody has a breaking point in which they begin to give themselves permission to live the lives that they want. And so I've noticed that our whole society appears to me to be an intricate set of permission. And we're all entering into different sets of systems of permissions, trying to grant ourselves what it is that we hope to be. So one of the important questions I ask myself now when I'm working on a task or I'm trying to understand something is, what permission am I trying to give myself? Because ultimately, I don't need it to be validated by anyone else. I just need to understand I have the permission in this world. I am free to choose what I want. I don't need to suffer to have what it is that I want or to go after what it is that I want. I think a lot of us look for validation from friends, family, from society even. I think that we don't want to look silly, but I think that understanding we're all looking for permission multiple times per day, that can be quite empowering as well. Take a lot of pressure off of us. It took a lot of pressure off of me. I understand I didn't need to do this. I didn't need to enter into these challenging permissions, because I think I wanted to say to myself that I'd been offered some money. People wanted to run marathons for me and donate the money to the charitable cause, but I felt that was too much. So I had created this situation where I felt I needed to suffer. I needed to work 6 hours a day, 7 days a week from 2 a.m. onwards to earn this money, even though people were trying to give it to me. So I was not accepting of the love that people were trying to offer, because I believed that I should suffer in the acquisition of my dream. And so I think that freeing myself from that way of thinking, that was quite enlightening. I'm still working on that. I think that it's perhaps an underpinning of a whole philosophical way of looking at the world. But I thought just some of the things you were saying, I thought maybe I should just talk about it. It's kind of raw, that is, that I don't feel that I'm settled with that. I had this big sort of wake up moment, but yeah, I need to work on it.
Yeah, no. Think about life and the thing about evolving yourself and creating purpose and meaning and getting to that breaking point per se and overcoming challenges. It's going to be a unique journey for everyone, because as we said earlier on in the podcast, it's going to be different areas in our life that we're going to have different mindsets, or we're going to have different ways of viewing the world. I don't view the world the same way as I did as a child or a teenager or even in my 20s. It's vastly different. And as we evolve and as we grow, we learn how to, I guess, fit into our skin, because in our sense, our skin is going to be what makes us feel most comfortable. So we see what in our life is meaningful to us at that moment. Maybe it is a car. Maybe it is our parents, and we're going to do what we need to do. We're going to handle our business in a sense. We give ourselves that purpose. It's not that we didn't care about our parents when we were a kid. It's just that our focus is a little bit different. Oftentimes when we're younger, we focus on growing up and having experiences and getting to that older age where we have maybe the ability to travel or the ability to get married and have our own family. But we don't necessarily know that our parents are getting old, or we don't see it quite yet because we're right there. I mean, I'm even a victim of this because most people don't see change if it's right in front of them. But if they separate themselves from any situation long enough and they come back to it, they will see the change. Similar to how, if a teacher, you're in school, teaching a first grader, and then they go off and now they're a fourth grader and they come see you. Oh my God, you're changed so much, right? Similar to our parents, we see them every single day. We might not see them start walking slower or thinking irrationally. We just see them as, oh, that's mom still, that's dad still. Maybe they got a few more grays and things like that, but that's, with old age. It's not until you separate yourself, you go off and you have your own family, and then eventually a couple of years later, On Thanksgiving or Christmas, you see them for who they are, who they're becoming. And then the reality sets in. They're getting older. And we start to then look at time. How much time do I have left with them? Because we have learned to live in a fast-paced world. This world is, that we live in is so fast. I mean, if you're bored, you can fix that in an instant with your smartphone. You can find something that, you can watch and listen to or play, and you're perfectly satisfied. But the thing about life is sometimes that dissatisfaction, that uneasiness, and you sit in it, it makes you appreciate those good moments, because there is going to become a time when mom and dad might not be there. What do? The work that you do, with spiritual counseling and guidance, I think is going to be just the tippy top of helping people get to that understanding of who they are, where they want to be, and how they want to live their life. And understanding that it's going to continually evolve as they grow up. So I know you want to say some things on that end, so I'm going to let you say some things.
Well, what you're talking about, there's a couple of things there. So I think for me, you're talking about the importance of mirrors. And so we need to understand that if we didn't have a mirror in a literal sense, we wouldn't get up in the morning and know, okay, this beard needs grooming. So we need the mirror to see how we look, but we also need to be shown other aspects of the self. And the best way for us to do that is to see ourselves in others. And so sometimes I think for me, I'm delivered certain individuals into my life when there's things that I need to learn. I had this experience earlier in the year. I met an absolutely wonderful woman who was the most talented yoga teacher I've ever met. I've been studying yoga for over 10 years. I've done it all around the world. I've done one-on-one tuition. I've done group classes, online classes, whatever. This woman was hands down the best. And she couldn't see that. She wasn't fully booked and she was not happy. She wasn't earning enough money and she was having to take on other work. And I questioned her. I was like, why are you not fully booked? And she still gave a few answers. And in the end, she said to me, it was just a sideline. She was more occupied on looking beyond that. She wanted to do something else. She had an idea of working in certain ways. She wanted to be something more than the yoga teacher. I was like shocked by this. I was like, how can you not see that this is what you can do? And so eventually, after a while, I realized that I was doing some of this in my own life. There are certain aspects of my work that have come to me so naturally that I don't look at it as anything of significance. And so people would like to have certain conversations with me. And I'm like, no, I'm working on this project. I'm working on that project. I'm always looking beyond it. And so it wasn't until I had this connection with this individual, she mirrored something that I was doing in my life. And having that epiphany was really powerful. And I think that when you talk about your parents aging, we all know that we're going to age. And sometimes it is seeing someone that you love begin to slow down. If you had a father or an uncle or brother who are really strong and then they start having to slow their life down and you realize, wow, okay, that might happen to me at some point. And so it gives you the opportunity to go, what do I want to do about it? I'm seeing this thing. How do I want to proceed? I think you talk about the speed of life as well when you say about how we can find instant gratification nowadays. I agree with that. For me, part of my spiritual journey, particularly from studying with the shamanic people, is learning to live in accordance with the speed of the universe, the speed of nature. And so what I mean by this is that I can't force a tree to provide me with the fruit any faster than it wants to. I can't make a flower blossom. I can't change the seasons. I can't make the days longer or shorter. All I can do is adapt my behavior to fit into that speed of the universe. And I think that that's one of the things that we've lost as a society with this industrial and digital revolution. For me, I think that as a consequence of that, when you're living in an extremely fast way, you're processing your thoughts so quickly, you don't know what ones are worth listening to. You don't know what ones are yours, what ones have been suggested by the media or by something else somewhere else. And so I think that when we move back into alignment with that natural speed of nature of this universe, then we can become more in tune with our own thoughts and begin to listen to what are ours and what ones are of the quality that we want to embrace and work on. As a final words for you, you sort of spoke about purpose as well. So I would say, again, this is something that the West is fixated on. Find your purpose. Spend all of your time searching for your purpose and then live your life in accordance with that purpose. Okay, that's great. But for me, one of the biggest epiphanies that I had on this journey was a number of years ago. There's an old forest that's near a house that I used to live in. I used to walk my dog there. It was about 3 miles away from any of the villages, so it was always quiet. And this forest had apparently been there since the last ice age. So it was this beautiful, pristine environment. And I was walking there in the autumn, and I become aware that there was this sound that I just loved. And there was this section of the walk that made me really happy. And it was the wind blowing through the pine trees. This noise that the branches made sounded like a sort of a rain stick or a set of maracas, like just gently playing. And it's just the most therapeutic and beautiful sound ever. And I had this realization that those trees had not evolved to make a noise when the wind blew through those branches. And actually, my most favorite part of that walk had no purpose. It was born of non-purpose. And so then I started understanding that my search for purpose, as encouraged by the Western world, actually hides all of this beautiful complexity that exists within our world that had no purpose when it was created. And so now I try to find times of non-purpose. And I've noticed that when I get myself into that state, then I start finding answers, and you can actually find your purpose in non-purpose. So I think that it's important to really reflect on looking at both sides of, like you say, the balance, the yin, the yang.
The thing about life is so magical. There's so many unknown beauties, and there's so many things that happen without our consent. But that's life, right? Where we don't need Mother Nature to consent to us to say, hey, is it okay if I have the sun shine and then the sun rays are on your skin and it feels good? Or that the wind blows and then you get a chill? That's living, that's life. And some of the work you do, I think it's going to really help people open up their minds and change and evolve their life. How can people find you?
I've got my website, jeremiahscott.co.uk. I'm on Facebook and Instagram. I've recently joined TikTok as well. It's evolving. Yeah, on all of the popular social medias. So yeah, you can find me online, really. I've got a book out as well. It's called The Theory of You. That's on Amazon. The Theory of You, a guide to awakening personal spiritual enlightenment. That would be online for worldwide buyers. It's in a few bookstores over in the UK as well. I'm always happy to meet new people.
Awesome. So I'll put those links in the description box below so people can check you out, join, follow you, and then reach out to you if they're interested in working with you or to begin that process of finding their purpose, finding their spirituality, or just to reinvigorate themselves to see life in a different light. Because I think some of the things that we talked about today are going to be an awakening for many people, an eye-opening experience that's going to help them get out of that rut that they're living in and start to look at the future in the sense of, I can make it the way I want it rather than the way I thought it should be. And society is to blame for that sometimes, where they tell us what we should want or what we need rather than looking on the inside and figuring that out for ourselves. I do want to thank you, Jeremiah Scott, for coming on and helping us with our spirituality. Great conversation today.
Thank you. Lovely to meet you.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for watching the episode with Jeremiah Scott and myself. And one of the things I wanted to talk about before I end the podcast, and I want to thank you, number one, for making it all the way to the end because it was a longer episode, the breaking point. And I have talked about this many times on the podcast. And what I call the breaking point is I call it the idea that our soul was offended. Everyone has a breaking point. Everyone has a point where your soul's offended. Just the different terminologies. When you speak to different coaches, they have a different terminology or a different way of viewing it. I love the idea of that breaking point. But then at the same time, the soul is very powerful. The soul is who we are intrinsically on the inside, because we can lie to ourselves all we want in the conscious mind and maybe even trick the subconscious mind into believing that also. But in reality, just because we can trick the subconscious mind or the conscious mind doesn't necessarily mean we're going to trick the soul. It's a little bit different. Our character, our being, the thing that makes us who we are, our wiring, it's hard to go against that because the brain can be easily manipulated. I can manipulate people into do things that I want. You've probably heard about reverse psychology. You probably heard about agreeableness or persuasion. What does that do to the brain? What does that do to the mind? How about mob psychosis? Why do you think all these people are going off and breaking windows and things like that, or they're protesting altogether? It's because of that wavelength, that heart wave pattern that's happening. Everyone just kind of comes together for that. But the problem is You don't necessarily need that in order to make changes in your life and in your soul. Now, you might find something that you resonate with or a moment in your life that you find to be an awakening in the sense that who you are is finally starting to become reality. There's a saying that you are born twice. First, when you're born out of your mother's womb, and the second, when you find the reason why you were born. But in reality, we are born again and again and again. The way I thought when I was a teenager is not the same way that I think as when I was in my 20s or an adult or when I was an accountant or a teacher. My mind has constantly evolved and constantly changed and fluctuated. I can't say who I am today is going to be who I am in 10 or 20 years. But what I can tell you is that the mindset that I have today is going to continue to evolve into the mindset that I need in order to do the work that I do, in order to live the life that I'm looking to live, looking for raising a family in a certain light. What type of mindset do I need for that? What type of resilience do I need? What type of traumas and experiences do I need to gain in order for me to learn how to evolve or to step up in life? Because the more days that I tack onto my life, the more I understand myself better. Maybe one day my shoulder is hurting or my elbow is hurting and I say, you know what? What's going on? Am I not taking care of myself? What do I need to do to heal? What am I not doing? Because sometimes I think it's easy to put a Band-Aid. It's easy to take a pill. It's easy to say, today is not my day. But in reality, every day can be your day. So you have to realize at some point in your life, how can you make each day the best day possible? How can you make today worth it? Because tomorrow is not promised. But in the sense of who we are becoming, our spirituality, in the sense of the idea of finding wisdom and learning from it, more so than just a knowledge set, we can accomplish great things in our life. Sometimes we just have to open up that gate for our mind to understand that we are people that are going to be learning and evolving and changing. And that path of how our spirit or our soul wants to move is going to be unique. So the path that you're on is going to be wonderful, but you do have to pay attention to it. Sometimes people don't pay attention to the little things that matter the most, or they don't pay attention to things that matter, and once they're gone, they regret it. You don't have to live life to the breaking point every single moment. You do have to figure out what is your why, how are you going to do it, and then begin that process of change. And that change can be as soft or as hard as you want it to be. You are the captain of your ship. But at some point, you're going to need a guide. At some point, you're going to need someone to help you because it's just more simplified. You don't need a coach to help you along the way, but I always encourage the company. Whether it be myself or Jeremiah, you're going to find yourself a good coach that's going to give you some guidance in how you're growing, how you're moving. And if you want to make certain changes in your life or if you want to have certain results, understanding, are those results going to bring about something that you're thinking it will bring about? Sometimes we might think that a certain position in a company is going to bring about happiness, when in reality, the only thing we have to do is slow down and find that happiness. So depending on where you are, how you're thinking, your journey is going to be different. I encourage you to find some company, find a coach that's going to help be that company for you. So when you're on that journey and you look around and you find that purpose, you understand exactly what was always yours. My name is Michael Rearden. I'm a mindset coach. If you have any questions, you can email me coachinginsession@gmail.com. If you're looking for coaching, you can head over to revenconcepts.com and you can apply for any of the coaching programs that we have available. I will see everyone in the next episode of Coaching in Session. Until then, everyone, take care.